My name is Brandon Hines, and I will be presenting on topic 2 for biomedical ethics, which is reproduction, right or privilege. For this presentation, I will be looking at two cases. The first case being China's one-child policy, and the second, which is the Octomom case. I will be looking at these cases through the scope of the four-principle approach and presenting solutions on how these cases could have been resolved. And finally, I will be giving my personal opinion on how I would resolve each case. So is reproduction a right or a privilege? An argument can be made for both sides. According to UNDP, Article 16, men and women have the right to marry and to found a family. This means that families have the right to utilize their autonomy to have as many children as they want. However, reproduction impacts society both economically and environmentally. Reproductive rights may be limited if individuals cannot afford to have children, or it can also be limited by government policies. So the first case we're going to be looking at is China's one-child policy. Introduced in 1997, this policy limited families to having no more than one child. This policy was seen as a necessary step for China's economic development and resource management. However, this policy gave rise to biomedical issues due to the violation of reproductive rights and autonomy. The policy also contributed to sex-selective abortion due to the cultural preference of having sons over daughters. And in the long term, it also led to gender imbalance, with the population having a significant number of men compared to women. Before diving into how China's one-child policy aligns with the four-principle approach, I'll first do a short overview on each principle. The first principle is autonomy. This refers to the respect for an individual's right to make informed, voluntary decisions about their own bodies. Secondly, there is beneficence, which is the obligation of a physician to do what is best for the patient's well-being. Next is non-maleficence, which is the duty of a physician to do no harm to the patient. And finally, there is justice, which is fair treatment and distribution of resources to patients. So how did China's one-child policy align with the four-principle approach? Firstly, there was a clear violation of autonomy. Couples were legally restricted to only having one child, and heavy fines were issued for non-compliance of this policy. This showed that the autonomy of the people was no longer recognized, and all reproductive decisions were now in the hands of the government. There was also a violation of non-maleficence in this policy, with both physical and psychological harm being inflicted. Women were reportedly compelled to undergo late-term abortions in cases where they already had one child. Also, these procedures took place without genuine consent. Tubal ligations and vasectomies were also mandated. In the context of psychological harm, preference for male children put significant mental pressure on women who had daughters. As a result, they were blamed and ostracized. Families also lived under constant monitoring and lived in fear of state penalties, which gave rise to chronic stress. Now, I'll move on to the Octomom case. This case deals with Nadia Suleiman, a woman in the United States who gave birth to octuplets in 2009 after undergoing in vitro fertilization. In this case, the physician did not do what was best for the patient's well-being. The physician prioritized achieving pregnancy over the overall well-being of both the mother and the children. The physician carried out the operation even though there were severe risks of premature birth, maternal hemorrhaging, and potential death of the mother and patient during the pregnancy or childbirth. Non-maleficence, which refers to doing no harm to the patient, was also broken in this case. The doctor ignored the risk and as a result caused harm to the children. All octuplets were born prematurely and required intensive care. The operation was very costly and took up a significant amount of public and medical resources. This led to public discussion on whether reproductive technologies should have limits when outcomes place heavy burdens on society. Due to these factors, justice was clearly not served in this case. So what could have been done to resolve the issues of these two cases? In the context of China's one-child policy, many abortions were carried out based on cultural preferences for sons over daughters. To fix this, a strict enforcement policy against sex-selective technology misuse could have been implemented. This implementation could have reduced psychological trauma and reduced the amount of situations where mothers had to experience involuntary abortions. In the Octomom case, in vitro fertilization guidelines existed, but were not regularly enforced. Stricter enforcement and supervision on this case could have mitigated the harm that occurred or prevented it from occurring entirely. Factors such as legal caps on embryo transfers and mandatory reporting of all medical operations could have also helped. To conclude, I'll be sharing my personal opinion on what I would have done to resolve each case. For China's one-child policy, I believe that the child cap should have been increased to 2 from the beginning. This would have mitigated the long-term demographic damage that having one child per family caused. And this would have also increased the likelihood of girls being born as well, due to increased reproductive flexibility of families. For the Octomom case, I believe that an embryo limit policy should have been put in place. This would have reduced the risk of all babies being born prematurely and would have used up significantly less public and medical resources. As a physician, I also would have given informed consent to the patient, explaining the full details of the operation. Therefore, she would have been able to fully utilize her autonomy. So I think these cases showed me how easily someone's reproductive rights could be taken away due to external pressures from the environment. In the Chinese one-child policy case, the cultural ways of China and the government became such a significant factor that the autonomy of individuals became obsolete. In the Octomom case, the patient could not fully utilize her autonomy due to lacking proper informed consent from the physician. These two cases really made me think about if we truly have the right to reproduce in an age where money and government policies influence all our daily lives. Thank you for listening, and that's the end of my presentation.